Hello everyone, and welcome to another virtual week of class. We need to talk about your individual proposals, and we will do that with the Writing Workshop 2. Remember, we had a Writing Workshop 1 that was your introductions and literature reviews, leading up to basically what would be a hypothesis or a prediction, and then Writing Workshop 2 takes over where you describe your methodology. So I'm going to try to do this somewhat briefly, but I encourage you to look at the slides again on your own in detail, look through the appendices of your books and the APA manual and things like that to get suggestions on like that for the method section, which entails basically the participants, who you'd like to use, the materials and measurement devices you use, and the procedures you use to gather this information, right? Remember, for your individual proposals, which again are the basically lit review and hypothesis, and then the way you test that is going to be ideal, right? Or your optimal way, if you're a researcher in the field, how you would like to collect data. So think, okay, if I was at a university and I was collecting data on whatever your individual proposal is about, what kind of people would ideally be your sample? What sorts of measurements would you like to collect, whether it's daily diaries or journals, whether it's observations or surveys, or maybe some sort of formal experiment? How would you ideally like to collect that data, and with who? Anyways, the who part of that is the participants, right? We say participants because they're freely choosing, right? But subjects, sometimes if it's observational study or animal research, things like that. Surveys, sometimes we say respondents. The is who do you want your participants to be, right? So for your individual proposal, the methodology section, the first section is your participants, and you describe the ideal, and remember this is proposed method, so the people you plan to use, so the rough demographic breakdown you hope to get, the number you hope to get, which is based on, of course, other things like previous research, and then, anything else about them you think is important, maybe if they're currently working or if they have experience with something. Depending on what kind of study you're doing, you may want to get more or less specific, right? We gather these people in a range of ways, right? So, qualitative versus quantitative is different. Qualitative is more about the depth, so the type of person is important, and the richness of the data, right? It's more cost, intense. So when we start getting enough data from a certain population or a group of people, we call that the point of redundancy, and then we move on to the next, type of person or start our data analysis. Once we've hit that point of redundancy in redundant data, right? But here it's depth and importance, balance, importance of the person that you get, balance with the resource, right? A lot of the research we do is more quantitative in nature. So we do more quantitative types of selection procedures where it's more randomized, ideally not snowball or convenience. Clusters even, not ideal because people end up in clusters for systematic reasons, right? So the less systematic, the more random you can be, the best. And, maybe segregated based slightly on the type of person you want, right? So maybe you're only looking at a phenomenon for one of the genders, or you want to replicate sort of the gender breakdown within that industry, which we call more stratified random sampling, right? Think about how you might get yours, and literally down to like maybe flyers or internet postings, things like that are important to the IRB, the review boards that govern this research. So think about how you would get these people, maybe what sort of location devices. Are you contacting a health center? Are you looking at local schools? How would you get these? And then finally, how many would you need, right? This is basically for statistical testing and that sort of thing. So the more the better, but the type of research sort of governs that, right? Qualitative less, quantitative more. And this is guided by previous studies. We'll give you ideas how many they used. So look to some of the studies you gather and see what they used in terms of the number of participants they had. But we won't be requiring you to do power analyses or anything like that. Graduate students have to do that to show how many participants they would ideally need to collect to be able to reach statistical significance. So think about yours. Who would you want? How many would you need? How would you get them, right? All of those are critical to the participants section of your proposed methodology to show that you thought through who you hope this to generalize to, as well as sort of the avenues to get them and get a representative. What you want to ask these people once you get them is, varied, right? So demographics we usually get. Sometimes we have to limit how much we ask for, so we don't identify people. But these are the sort of, descriptives of who we got and who we hope to generalize our research to, right? Some people, may not be able to answer. Some people have guardianship, so those are things to consider. But what sorts of things do you want to ask them? What kinds of consent do you need to get? So what demographics did you want? What's relevant? Sometimes things like work experience, like I said earlier, is relevant. Sometimes this is more descriptives of who they are, right? In terms of ethical concerns, I mentioned not asking too much. We likely won't be doing in-person data collection, but remember to also make sure they consent, that they're guaranteed anonymity. Through online collection, things like masking IP addresses are important for the institutional review boards, as well as offering sort of services at the end if they feel bothered, even through an online survey, who they should contact, the Office of Research, Counseling Services, if they'd like to talk to somebody, that sort of thing, right? For the different types of, studies we have, qualitative versus quantitative, we tend to use different types of, measurement devices, right? So interviews, things like that, observation, structured observation, rating forms, daily diaries, maybe for more qualitative sorts of studies. Quantitative studies, we tend to use the published scales, right? So like the Rosenberg self-esteem scale from 1970, whatever. You would use that and ideally put it in your appendix of your individual proposal. So if you end up conducting your study, you have those items ready to go, right? You ideally want to avoid creating your own, right? So we use these non-proprietary scientific-based scales. Proprietary just means that they're kind of for sale, right? So we don't want to use any that we have to pay for as researchers most of the time, or as students, of course. So avoid making your own. That's a very long process. It's an involved process. So, that's not ideal. You want to avoid that. Find one that's validated, been used before, and you'll be safer there and maybe more able to even find significant. So think about your measures. What kind of measures do you want to ask? Demographics all the way to those scientific scales. You can do more experimental stuff. We'll talk about that, but you'd have to build that into your survey mechanisms. If you did it virtually. So some people see one thing, some people see another, and then maybe answer questions afterwards. That's possible, but we're talking about the procedures, which is next, which is the what you will do, right? I say even for simple studies, this is important because people want to be able to replicate or see, exactly how you did your study, and then maybe as a result, do different things, improve upon methods, replicate things to see if they find the same results, a variety of things. So it's really important for this. For non-experimental, maybe things about the location, if it's a qualitative sort of observational study, what will be done in the presence of people, if it's like interviews or things like that, how long interactions will be, if it's like focus groups, right? And all of this stuff you may want to look at in advance to see, would it work once it actually is released. Even surveys and things, it's good to pilot those and run through them before anybody sees them, right, to make sure they work good on different devices, and for people that aren't on the research team, that don't know the study, that they can read through. And for experimental, a little bit more difficult, right? Of course, if you're manipulating some variable or giving people some treatment device, you want to think about who you're going to control that to, who you're going to compare that to with like a control group, how you're going to randomly assign people to groups. There's a lot of considerations there, even for smaller studies, but, detailing that, giving stuff in the appendices is nice to describe the sort of different manipulations or different scripts or things that people will see. Even different methods of tracking people's Instagram history or manipulating what they see would be nice to be detailed somehow. Anyway, so think about how you're going to do this, right? Think through those procedures, and remember this is all predicted or proposed, right? So you have your literature review, which is sort of present or past tense, right? Your hypotheses and predictions, which are future, and your methodology, which will be future tense for this individual proposal stage, right? And that's as far as you go. No data, no results, no discussion, simply a literature review with prediction, and then some set of methodology that you're assuming you could do if you were a researcher but may be limited here, of course, depending on how we collect data. But think ideal in terms of participants and measures and procedures, and hopefully then one day you may even be able to do that study.